Yes, metalheads, welcome to the latest edition of History Bites. Today we're in Stratford on Avon, following the trail of the Bard William Shakespeare. Here's his statue behind me. Let's take a mooch around the town and see what venues and parts of Shakespeare's life we can find. On to the first.
All the other children when you so crucial on the dead in from me no man home. All the other children when you so crucial on the dead in quick rat on me moha. All the other children when you so crucial on the dead in from me no man home. All the other children when you so crucial on the dead in.
So here's our first port of call on our tour of Stratford on Avon. This is Shakespeare's birthplace. The place was built in the mid-16th century and owned by his father John and his mother Mary Arden. It's a half-timbered Tudor building. William was born on the 23rd of April 1564 and lived here as a child. During its time it's worked as a glovery, his father's trade, and then it became an inn called the Maidenhead Inn and then the Swan and Maidenhead. And it stayed as an inn into the 18th century when more latter day authors, Dickens, Walter Scott, Byron, Keats, Thackeray and Tennyson visited the building, and they've signed it around the window frames and on the walls. Right, let's move on to our next location. So we're gradually walking our way through Stratford on Avon. The quality of this Tudor architecture in the town is absolutely second to none. These cracking timber frame buildings. That's now luxury apartments, as you might have guessed. But then here we've got the Hathaway tea rooms. I'm sure you can go and have a cuppa up in there. Sit and look out the windows across the town. Superb. And the whole centre of the town has preserved its Tudor architecture, all in pristine condition. It's almost as if you transported back 500 years. Really well maintained, properly looked after, all the wood in great condition, all the infill between all painted, absolutely wonderful. So we're now in a new place in Stratford on Avon. We're perhaps 3 or 4 minutes from Shakespeare's birthplace, and we've got the new place, Shakespeare Museum here. Next door is the ground where Shakespeare's own house stood, which he bought in 1593 and lived there until his death in 1616. Now this land's been recently acquired in the last decade, I do believe. Archaeological diggers have been undertaken here and the grounds are being restored into gardens. It's not open to the public for another year. I'll try and get a view through here between the apple cordons. But this is the place, or at least the site, of where Stratford's home, of where Shakespeare's home was in Stratford. Quite fantastic gardens being made here. That's rather cool. We're now down on the banks of the River Avon on what's known as the Bancroft Gardens, and if I just spin us around, Here we have the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, home of the Royal Shakespeare Company, where all his plays have been performed for decades. It's a bit of a modern carbuncle, as Prince Charles once described these more modern buildings. A blend of brick and glass and steel works. It's hardly the venue of what his Globe Theatre would have been in the day, the restoration of which is in London, and probably much more atmospheric to watch his plays. Quite what it's like in here, I don't know. But if you want to see Shakespeare performed on his home turf, as to say, Stratford on Avon's the place. And so this is where our story ends. When William Shakespeare popped his clogs, shuffled off this mortal coil, he's buried here at the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford on Avon. We're only 4 minutes walk down the riverbank from where his house was. I wonder if it's open to get in and find his grave. Magnificent avenue of trees on the approach down. Looking good. So here we are in the Holy Trinity Church. Not a usual venue for me to visit as a heathen rather than a Christian, but I'm going to keep my voice down out of respect to other visitors here and get you some footage inside the church where Shakespeare's buried. There's some absolutely magnificent wood carving up here. The hours of dedicated craftsmanship that's gone into making that. Fantastic. So we're now down the eastern end of the church where the altar stands, and right in front of me here, marked out with rope, is the grave of Shakespeare. And coming on here, here's the epitaph. There's also a few more graves here, buried beside his wife Anne, and various other members of the Shakespeare family. And just before I leave the church, I spotted what they call the Clockton Chapel. Used to be known as the Lady Chapel in medieval times, before the Reformation under Henry VIII. But there are some very interesting tombs in here from the late 1500s into the 1600s. Let me do these justice. Now these are tombs of members of the Clockton family. This is Joyce Clockton, who was lady-in-waiting to Gloriana Elizabeth I, and her husband George Carlew, Earl of Totnes, who was Master of Ordnance under James I. Absolutely fantastically preserved architecture. Late Tudor, early Jacobean. Well worth a visit here today. Right, metalheads, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of History Bites. I look forward to getting out and visiting some more history in the next couple of weeks and bringing it to you. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Bye bye.